So round of applause for Nicole with tech hiring is broken. It is broken.
So that's going to be a tough one to follow, but I'll do my best. So quick note on the talk title. I've been asked by friends, coworkers, conference organizers, though not here, if this was a typo. No, it is not. I do believe tech hiring is broken, I will explain what that means momentarily. So my name is Nicole Tibaldi. I'm a front-end engineer at Manifold. Yes, you read that right. I have been known to masquerade as a gopher at times when my services are needed. And I'm a frequent interviewer of our back-end, front-end, product, all sorts of candidates. I also consider myself to be a full-time culture enthusiast. I really care about what our hiring practices and also just our day-to-day practices do and how they influence our culture. So, back to tech hiring is broken. If you type the phrase tech hiring is broken into Google, you will see 18.7 million search results. So this is something we all as an industry are talking about and that we really care about. So you might be sitting in your seat thinking, I don't know, Nicole, tech hiring's fine, what are you talking about? So first of all, let's talk a little bit about what these articles in particular are trying to address. So I read a ton of these 18.7 million search results just to see, and there are two main themes that folks in the industry are talking about. One is whiteboarding. The idea that whiteboarding is a poor or unfair assessment of skills, that it's not a reflection of what a developer's day-to-day life is like. And the other is that long interviews waste time on both sides. So experienced candidates don't want to spend their time in long interview loops with phone screens and technical assessments, and hiring managers don't want to be digging through someone's projects and open source contributions to try to figure out what kind of developer they are. So these are two very valid points, I just want to put that out there, but there's a lot more about tech hiring that's not working that we don't talk about. So in this talk, we'll also talk a little bit, we'll talk about those things, and we'll also talk about what else could be improved. So one of the things I've noticed generally in the industry, and not for every company, there's not a lot of effort toward inclusion and diversity in the hiring process. And this is in a lot of ways. There's little effort toward inclusion and diversity in the sense of culture and gender, and also in experience level, and we'll examine that a bit later. Another is a lack of feedback. I'm sure every one of you can think of a time that you've been in an interview loop, and it doesn't matter if you were accepted or rejected, if you were moved to the next round or they said no thanks. The email you get probably said something like, hey, we'd like to move you on, or no thanks, we're going to pursue some other candidate, and that's all you ever hear. And there's no assessment of what we all call soft skills. I don't really love this term, but our ability to communicate, our ability to facilitate, our ability to work as a team. And as we all know, these are really important skills. Your ability to write code is not the only thing that would make you a good member of a team. So maybe I've convinced you that tech hiring is in fact broken, and you're thinking, okay, well, what can I do to make my hiring process better? So getting started on this, even before interviews, there are some things you can do. One is to write inclusive job descriptions. So there are services that will help you with this. There's also plenty of articles that you can read. But there have been studies done showing that certain language will make certain candidates either apply or not. On my team, we've also done some A/B testing of this to see if our job descriptions didn't encourage applicants who were single mothers or who were confused by the way we describe our remote culture and our time zones and felt that they weren't qualified to apply even when they were. Another is to communicate non-negotiable experience, and this is going to vary depending on your needs at your company. But for example, if you're hiring for back-end developers and you're looking for gophers, and you have a really experienced Python developer apply, I'm talking about a real situation that's happened to me, and this person is really amazing, but you know that even though they'll ramp up pretty quick, your team just doesn't have the capacity for it. So that's something you'd want to communicate up front, and they might decide, hey, they want to take your tech assessment anyway, or you know what, this isn't for me, but at least they know what you're expecting up front. And the last thing is determine the person's alignment with your company, both the mission and also the stage that your company is at. So we as developers are very passionate about not only the code that we write, but often the products that we're building. So giving someone a sense of what your company does and what your values are is really important, and also giving them a sense of the stage that your company is at. Some people thrive more in a startup environment where they have the ability to explore different avenues, and some people thrive more in a larger company culture where the roles and responsibilities are just a little bit better defined. There are also some things you can do all throughout the process, whether it be phone screens or coding interviews, to help your candidates. One is to be transparent. Something that goes a long way is to just communicate with a candidate what things they're going to be expected to do in your interview process. So will they have, what are the stages of the interviews? How much time commitment can they expect? And another is to give feedback often. So if you choose to reject a candidate, let them know in a constructive way something that they can improve. And also, and this is something that really struck me about Manifold when I was hired, if you choose to move someone on, tell them a little bit about why. Tell them something that they did that you really liked. It goes a long way and says a lot about your company. So now we can talk a little bit about the hottest topic of tech hiring is broken, which is how do we hire for technical skills? So I'm going to start sort of at the most basic and work up to what I think is something a little bit better. So we'll talk a little bit about whiteboarding interviews. Why do we hate the whiteboard interviews so much? There are a ton of reasons. One is that algorithms are a really specific skill set. As someone who has taken a bunch of whiteboarding interviews, I know that I was best at this when I was practicing it. And while you may find algorithms to be useful in your everyday life, this is not the application that you'll have. Another is that whiteboarding interviews give you no access to outside resources. As developers, one of our most important skill sets is being able to go out and find the answer to a problem, whether that means looking on Google or Stack Overflow or reading documentation. And so this kind of strips away that part, and it doesn't assess it either. And a whiteboard lacks syntax highlighting and ways to debug your code. So these are things that we rely on every day, just these kind of micro feedback mechanisms that let us know if we're on the right track or not. And while there are some ways that you can debug your whiteboard code, like stepping through with a sample input, it's much harder and it doesn't really replicate the true developer experience. So, okay, let's not use whiteboards. What do we do now? So a lot of companies have actually moved to this concept of a live coding interview where you might see kind of the same problem that you'd see in a whiteboarding interview, but in a shared editor where the interviewer and the interviewee can kind of work together on a problem. I've even done interviews like this where the interviewers have said, hey, yeah, you can go out and use all the outside resources that you want as long as you don't Google the answer to the problem, and that's totally cool. So this is better, but there's still some problems. One is that it's really high pressure, just like whiteboarding. I know tons of talented developers who wouldn't do well in this situation. It's kind of like having your boss come and stand over your shoulder while you're working. It just creates this sort of stressful atmosphere that a lot of people don't thrive in. And it also only shows a small subset of skills. When you have these sort of micro problems, you don't get insight into a candidate's ability to kind of solve a larger, more intricate problem. But again, this is better than the whiteboard. So next, a little bit about what we're all calling homeworks and take-homes. I've seen these become a lot more popular in the last few years, which is awesome. These kinds of assignments will be things where a company sends a candidate an assignment, they're expected to complete it in some number of days or hours, and then return it and have somebody take a look. So some examples of this could be if you have a front-end candidate using this API, build an application that will display the following data. Or for back-end, build an API that returns the following. Or you might get something more generic, like create a program that takes this input and returns this output. And a lot of times these will be attached to a very loose time constraint, like do this in about 4 hours, but they really let you take as long as you want, or return it to us by the end of the week. So that's a lot better. And it's a lot more representative of what the experience of our day-to-day work is like. But it sort of has its own issues. The prompts are super nebulous. If you think about what I talked about 2 slides ago, any candidate might interpret these problems differently and choose to go a different path, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it means that the submissions will vary wildly, and it makes comparing any two very difficult. And the prioritization that a candidate chooses to do might be what they think you believe is most important, or what they're most comfortable with, and so you'll get a wide array of different things. And these sorts of loose time constraints also create a bias toward a certain type of candidate. Someone who has a ton of time to invest in this, and every candidate is going to want to return their best work if they want to work for you. People who are either not working right now or who don't have significant responsibilities outside of work, this is going to favor those people in a big way. It sort of rewards the idea that they have endless time to work on it. So I think the homework and the take-home, the homework or the take-home, are a really great way to approach hiring, to approach technical assessments, but there are some ways that it can be done a little bit better. So a better homework should do a few things, in my opinion. On my team, what we do is we send candidates an existing code base, one similar to what we work with at the company. It gives them a starting point, not having to worry about initial configuration issues and so on, and gives them also an idea of what it might look like to work for you. Have a specific task with clear instructions. So on my team, for both front end and back end, our assignments include a list. We have a product priority that's been, a fake product priority that we give, a new feature that needs to be implemented, along with tech debt that's expected to be resolved, asking to add tests in front end cases, styling, and so it kind of lets the candidate know, what are we actually looking for? Also have reasonable time constraints, and that's going to vary depending on what you're expecting, but a few hours, and have them return it in that window so that you don't have people who have tons of extra time get the advantage of being able to invest that time in it. And they should be easy to compare and evaluate. So when you have specific parameters, like we talked about earlier, it's pretty easy to take any 2 submissions and decide how they compare, and if one is better or just different than another. And when we do this kind of take-home assignment, what does it allow us to learn about a candidate that's different from any other? One is the candidate's ability to prioritize. When you have sort of these different tasks like I discussed, you'll see if they were able to focus on the product vision while also cleaning up tech debt along the way and not getting distracted. Another is how they'd work in the code base. Depending on how you set it up, you can see how they'd work with different tools and frameworks that you've used, and also if you've set up lint rules or anything like that, how they might behave when they see something that's unusual. And also how quickly someone can understand new concepts. So you're asking a lot in this scenario, but it's also a common problem. Jump into a new code base, try to understand something, perhaps read documentation about certain tools that you've never used before. So now that we've covered the technical assessment, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can be better at diversity and inclusion in our hiring processes. hopefully this is something that we all care about, and diversity can mean a ton of things. This can mean diversity of culture, diversity of gender, diversity of experience, both work experience and personal. And the more of these varied experiences we get, the more angles a team can look at a problem from, and the more effective they'll be. So the first thing is to try to reduce the impact of unconscious bias as much as possible. One thing that we do on my team is to anonymize code submissions. So in our case, we use pull requests, but it could be anything, obscuring the person's GitHub username, or whatever the case may be. This allows you to kind of look objectively at the submission without worrying about either whether there's some bias based on gender or culture, or even just assuming the person's performance based on their work history. Another is to define culture fit up front. Culture fit is very important, but is also something that can be very dangerous if used improperly. Culture fit shouldn't be something that creates homogeny. It shouldn't be, let's hire all people who like dogs, or people who like to drink beer after work. Culture fit might look something more like, we want to hire people who are open to feedback, or we want to hire people who are open to listening to ideas from others. So defining that up front and not allowing it to make your culture homogeneous is super important. And avoid groupthink. On my team, we solve this by having code reviews or other interview feedback sent all to one person, and then distributed more widely when everybody has had a chance to give feedback. Whether you want to or not, knowing what somebody else thought about a candidate gets in your head and influences the feelings that you have going forward. Another thing I'd love to talk about is how we can be more fair to junior candidates. And I hate the term junior, but it's used all over the place. People who don't have as much industry experience. And this is another form of diversity that we talked about, right? Diversity of experience. So I'll tell a little bit of a story. Working on a small team eventually got to a point where we felt we could be able to hire somebody at this level and wanted to do so, wanted to help somebody kind of level up their skills. And so we distributed out our coding assignment that we have structured much the way I discussed before. This was for a front-end candidate, and it included a bunch of kind of like libraries that we were using in our front-end code base, but some of them were kind of hard to understand. And so our first sort of junior candidate took this assignment, and they struggled a lot. Couldn't really get through any of the product problem, and sent an email back that was super sad, kind of saying, I really tried, I read a lot of documentation, I just couldn't get anywhere in 4 hours. I don't really feel like this was a great representation of what I can do. And I heard about this and I felt terrible. You know, if we're looking to hire somebody at this level, we should be able to evaluate them fairly. So I took that feedback and I thought, okay, how can we make this more fair to somebody at this level? And so I actually went out and wrote a new homework assignment. And I tried to keep a couple of things in mind when I did that. One was to test only the vital skills. So we had determined that on the front end, we really wanted somebody who had experience or at least an understanding of React. This could be anything when you're hiring. And so that was a non-negotiable for us, and I included it in the new assignment. But I didn't include any of the other tools that this candidate had struggled so mightily with. I just wanted to get a sense of their understanding of React. And evaluate their problem-solving ability first and foremost. So somebody who does well with solving problems, who has the ability to learn, will be able to pick up all of these other things in short order. So just evaluating their ability to manipulate data or something along those lines was what I chose to go with there. Another important point I want to bring up, since we're talking about sending code out to candidates when we're hiring, is how is our code a reflection of our culture? The subject matter of an assignment or problem that you come up with can be really important. You might want to consider this as another part of the culture fit idea, but if you want to send out an assignment, you might think about either making it related to the subject matter that your company works on, or make it something pretty generic. An assignment that revolves around football or beer might give someone the impression that your company has a certain culture, even if it doesn't. And another is language, for example, using gendered pronouns all over the place. And this is actually important for hiring and also in general. For example, if you're referring to a developer only as being male over and over again, that might discourage your female candidates from feeling comfortable in your environment. So, some main points to wrap up. Be considerate when you're interviewing. Respect your candidate's time, background, and experience. Try to make the interview process as fair as possible. Represent the role. Give assignments that make sense for the job. Try to replicate what a day in their life would be like. And the last and most important is to constantly improve. So when you get feedback from a candidate, try to really think about it and see how you can make improvements based on that. And also self-reflect. If something feels wrong to you, dig in on it and see what you can do better. And keeping these things in mind, I think we can make tech hiring a little bit less broken. On a related note, Manifold is hiring. If you'd like to talk to us in the back, we'll be there. Thank you very much. I'm assuming I have a little time to take questions if anyone has any.
I'll just shout.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah. Regarding the feedback, so companies giving feedback, I know some big companies like GitHub specifically state at the beginning, we will not be giving you feedback because of possible legal whatever. Can you speak to that a little bit, or is that an actual concern that you at your company have, or if other companies should have that, or if it's just sort of like the food waste thing, like it's not a reality?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't really see the harm in it. I mean, I can understand we're getting too specific or maybe getting too critical could create a problem. But I can say, for example, you know, I got some feedback when I was hired at Manifold along the lines of, you know, some of the interviewers really liked XYZ in your code, and they also felt, you know, there was a good sense of maturity in, you know, in your writing. I don't really see how there's a ton of harm in that. So I guess being careful and being thoughtful about what you write back to somebody is probably the best way to approach that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. As someone who's currently interviewing, do you have any advice for the interviewee and how they can try and help improve the process?
Advice for improving the process? I think giving the company feedback is respectful feedback is the best thing that you can do. You know, talking about that situation with the sort of newer person that we had been interviewing, I totally appreciated hearing that. It didn't feel critical at all. It felt more like, ooh, we messed up and I want to make it better. So I think that's a really good way to kind of approach it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. So I really like the idea of sending out homework, but I think a lot of the overhead is content. So like you know, how do you deal with sending out actual like company code to candidates? And do you come up with new assignments all the time? And how frequently do you do it?
Not very often. We've been using we kind of just created a new one kind of based on some of the feedback I had gotten, but we had been using the same one for like a year or a year and a half. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, especially if you make it reflect your code base really well, it's going to get out of date to some degree, but it'll also still give you a good idea of somebody's skills and experience. So we have like a repo that we clone and send it out to people, and it's worked out really well. I mean, there is some overhead in it, but I think the results have been totally worth it.
Have you noticed like your assignments being found online? Because I think we used to do the same homework assignment for a while, and we started to find it circulating online, so it became a thing, and it didn't really work for us.
I've never heard of our assignment being circulated online. We ask people not to. Please don't do that. So yeah, no, actually, people have been really respectful about that, and it's really awesome. I think things that get circulated online more often are like phone screen questions, or like, you know, things that you kind of, that come up in interviews. Like you can go on Glassdoor and find all sorts of stuff for sure.
Quick question. So what are your thoughts on giving the candidate information to prepare with? Like, for example, for a phone screen, telling them what topics will be covered, maybe in greater detail, so that they have a chance to learn it, even if that's not part of their background?
We have done that in some cases where we felt it was appropriate, and I think that's totally cool as well. I think sometimes it ends up being sort of like a judgment call where, you know, if you're looking to hire a junior and you want to give them a heads up on kind of see how well they learn in a short period of time, that's not a bad way to handle it. Obviously, you kind of want to keep some things private just so you can get, you know, so you can have a fair assessment, but I think, yeah, that's totally fair as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.